Hello and welcome to our fly through of The Great Gatsby, Chapter 5. In Chapter 5, we are at the dead centre of the story. You might remember I mentioned in an earlier session that the structure is called chiasmus, which means that there's a balance. It's like there are two wings of an aeroplane out here, and we are bang in the middle, and it's in the middle of the book that Gatsby achieves his dream. We've been leading up to this moment, and it comes absolutely in the centre of the work. He is going to meet the girl that he has been tracking down all these years. When Nick gets home to West Egg, he's afraid for a moment that his house is on fire. Once again, everything that's got to do with Gatsby is larger than it ought to be. All that's really happened is that Gatsby's house is lit from tower to cellar. At first I thought it was another party, but then he realises that it isn't, because as his taxi groaned away, he sees Gatsby walking towards him across the lawn. Gatsby's very keyed up, and he suggests that they should go to Coney Island. Nick says, nope, I've got to get my beauty sleep. And so Gatsby says, well, how about we take a plunge in the swimming pool? I haven't made use of it all summer. And in fact, he never does. This is a sad foreshadowing, because when Gatsby finally takes a swim, it's going to be the last thing that he ever does. So Nick insists that he has to go to bed. And then kind of, quite endearing way, shrugs off the fact that they're going to be having tea tomorrow and he's going to be meeting Daisy, the object of his desire. Oh, that's all right, he said carelessly. I don't want to put you to any trouble. So Nick has agreed that they're going to go ahead and do this tomorrow. And when Gatsby looks around, he says, look, I'm going to get the grass cut. He looks at the grass in Nick's house and decides that he doesn't think that it's a good enough grass cut for the scene that he wants to have with Daisy. So he then offers in a very clumsy way to put a bit of money Nick's way. He says, look, I rather gather that you haven't got too much money, do you? And Nick says, no, not very much. And he says, well, I can put a little bit your way. Very directly and firmly. Nick says no. He realises that what he's being asked to do is no doubt something shady, and he doesn't want anything to do with it, so he puts him off. And Gatsby says, oh, you wouldn't have to do any business with Wolfsheim. Even so, Nick sticks with his principles and says that no, he won't be having anything to do with any of his money-making schemes. So he then goes away and goes to bed. And he calls Daisy from the office the next morning and invites her to come to tea, and he tells her not to bring Tom. Daisy misinterprets this, or does she? We're not really sure if she's just playing, but she thinks perhaps Nick is about to make a play for her because he's told her that she has to come alone. Very sadly for them, the day begins with pouring rain. Now, as you know, bad weather is 100% a sign of something bad happening to the characters. Something is going to go awry. So it's a bad sign. It's a day that dawns with pouring rain, and Mr. Gatsby has sent somebody dragging a lawnmower who comes to cut the grass. Now, when I was a child and had grass to cut, my dad wouldn't do it if it was raining, but perhaps they're different in West Egg. And then the next thing that happens is there's an absolute greenhouse worth of flowers arrive. At 2:00, a greenhouse arrived from Gatsby's with innumerable receptacles to contain it. An hour later, the front door opened nervously, and Gatsby, in a white flannel suit, silver shirt, and gold-coloured tie, hurried in. He was pale, and there were dark signs of sleeplessness beneath his eyes. So we've seen Gatsby engage in an elaborate act of set dressing, as if this was a stage and he needs to make it look right. It's Nick's house and it's Nick's invitation, supposedly, but Gatsby's gone to all this trouble to make sure that the place looks right for the act, for the drama that he wants to see performed there. Gatsby takes over. And one of the questions we need to ask as we plumb the depths of Nick's character is why he allows that to happen. Nick is passive. He stands back. He lets Gatsby do what Gatsby wants to. However, he's also very sympathetic to Gatsby, and we sense the huge anxiety that Gatsby is feeling. He's very, very agitated. The rain cools at about 3:30 to a damp mist, through which occasional thin drops swam like dew. Gatsby looked with vacant eyes through a copy. He's got to fill in the time, so he's reading this and he's looking out the window, and then he suddenly has a panic and he says, "Nobody's coming to tea, it's too late." Just at the moment where she's arriving, possibly fashionably very slightly late, he just completely loses it. Nick says, "Don't be silly, it's just 2 minutes to 4, but he sits down miserably, as if I had pushed him. And simultaneously there was the sound of a motor turning into my lane. We both jumped up. A little harrowed myself, I went out into the yard. Now this meeting is freighted with huge emotional importance. And if any of you have looked forward to the arrival of somebody that you hope will become your love, then you will know the feeling that goes with it, the anticipation. Is it going to work? Is it not going to work? Under the dripping bare lilac trees, a large open car was coming up the drive. It stopped. Daisy's face, tipped sideways beneath a three-cornered lavender hat, looked out at me with a bright, ecstatic smile. He paints a lovely picture of a lovely woman. The exhilarating ripple of her voice was a wild tonic to rain. I had to follow the sound of it for a moment, up and down, with my ear alone before any words came through. Again and again, we hear that it's Daisy's voice, the motif of her voice, is what actually holds the key to her allure. And then she says something low in his ear, which is playfully suggestive about why she needed to come alone. They go inside, but to my overwhelming surprise, the living room is deserted. So Gatsby's shot through. We don't know where he is. He says, "That's funny." But then there is a dignified knocking at the front door. So Gatsby's pretending that he's just arrived, even though he's been there for ages. Pale as death, with hands plunged like weights in his coat pockets, was standing in a puddle of water, glaring tragically into my eyes. Poor forlorn Gatsby. With his hands still in his coat pocket, he stalked by me into the hall, turned sharply as if he were on a wire. He's so taut and tight. It wasn't a bit funny. Aware of the loud beating of my heart, I pulled the door to against the increasing rain. For half a minute there wasn't a sound. And then Daisy's voice on a clear, artificial tone. "I certainly am awfully glad to see you again." A pause. It endured horribly. And Gatsby, with his hands still in his pockets, when Nick goes in, is reclining against the mantelpiece in a strained counterfeit of perfect ease. It does eventually come right. We have trembling fingers. We have Gatsby being rigid. We have Daisy mentioning that it's some years since they've seen each other, and Gatsby providing the exact number, 5 years, next November, and the automatic quality of his answer set us all back at least another minute. It goes on, there's confusion and cups and cakes, note the alliteration, and Daisy and I talk with tense, unhappy eyes, but as calmness wasn't an end in itself, I made an excuse at the first possible moment and got to my feet, so Nick just leaves them to it. "Where are you going?" demanded Gatsby. He followed me wildly into the kitchen, and then Gatsby kind of breaks down. He says, "This is a terrible mistake." Nick reassures him, "You're just embarrassed." And Daisy's embarrassed too. "You're acting like a little boy," I broke out impatiently. "And not only that, you're rude." So for once, Nick does actually step up and say the truth. Eventually, Gatsby does go back into the living room, and after half an hour, the sun shone again. So that's a suggestion that things are coming good. The grocer's automobile rounded Gatsby's drive with the raw material for his servant's dinner. And eventually, when Nick goes back into the room to find Gatsby and Daisy sitting together, he sees that Daisy's face is smeared with tears. And when I came in, she jumped up and began wiping at it with her handkerchief. Gatsby had changed so much, he literally glowed. A new well-being radiated from him and filled the little room. So at last everything has come right. And then he says, I want you and Daisy to come over to my house. And he says, it took me 3 years to earn the money that bought it. And he said too much because Nick said, I thought you inherited your money. He fudges for a little bit in order to make sure that it's still, he can go ahead. I think he hardly knew what he was saying. For when I asked him what business he was in, he answered, that's my affair. So he shuts him up. Then we get over in the house. She says, Daisy says, that huge place there. She's really impressed with it. Do you like it? I love it, but I don't see how you can live there all alone. Then they go over to see it. And what they see is this extraordinary cornucopia, this amazing array of rooms. We see the Marie Antoinette music rooms, the restoration salons. We admire the gardens. We see that false copy of the Merton College Library. We go upstairs through period bedrooms swathed in rose and lavender silk and vivid with new flowers. You need to read for yourselves out loud the description of these rooms because it's just so abundant. There's so much richness there. His bedroom was the simplest room of all, except where the dresser was garnished with a toilet set of pure gold, a toilet set meaning brushes, combs and mirrors. Daisy took the brush with delight and smoothed her hair. He had passed visibly through 2 states and was entering upon a third. After his embarrassment, that's his first state, and then his unreasoning joy, that's his second state, he is consumed with wonder at her presence. It's like he's just dazzled by her. He had been full of the idea so long, dreamed it right through to the end, waited with his teeth set, and there it is. Recovering himself in a minute, he opened for us 2 hulking, last time we heard that word used, it was to describe Tom, and it was not a compliment, 2 hulking cabinets, which held his massed suits and dressing gowns and ties and shirts piled like bricks in stacks, a dozen high. I've got a man in England who buys me clothes. Then he takes out a pile of shirts. Again, this is an extremely famous scene. He begins throwing them one by one before us, shirts of sheer linen, thick silk, fine flannel, which lost their folds as they fell and covered the table in many-coloured disarray. He brought more of the soft reach heap mounted higher, shirts with stripes and scrolls and plaids and coral and apple green and lavender, on and on and on. It goes, this huge, long list. The accumulation of Gatsby's wealth, the accumulation of his excess is being put before us in the form of shirts. And what does it do? It sends Daisy into hysterics. She began to cry stormily. They're such beautiful shirts, she sobbed, her voice muffled in the thick folds. It's kind of like, orgasmic delight. She's quintessentially Daisy here. She is a superficial airhead. She is being driven mad for delight. It makes me sad because I've never seen such beautiful shirts before. And then Gatsby takes her outside and he shows her home across the bay. You always have a green light that burns all night at the end of your dock. But this doesn't seem to make much difference to Daisy. It doesn't mean much to her. However, what Gatsby realises is that the colossal significance of that light had now vanished forever. Gatsby has attained his dream. And now, what difference will that make? Will it make any difference? By the end of the chapter, we have the man, Klipspringer, who's the kind of boarder, the party guest that never goes home, putting the gramophone on. And he's playing this song called Ain't We Got Fun? And you need to listen to the words. You need to actually look it up, listen to it on YouTube. In the morning, in the evening, ain't we got fun? And one thing's sure and nothing surer. The rich get rich and the poor get poorer. This is quintessentially what's going on. At the end, we see that Gatsby adjusts himself a little, visibly. His hand took hold of hers, and as she said something low in his ear, he turned toward her with a rush of emotion. I think that the voice held him.